Um, Bruce?
Yeah.
So there was a question that I think came up since this morning's meeting with regards to AIR's simulator and the weights that were used.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's something that we want to, since it's clearly it's an adequacy question too.
Yeah, I mean, we'll want Drew to respond to those kinds of questions.
Yeah, particularly because I think it's timely given today's work groups. Yeah, great.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of questions about the specific calculations and weightings in the AIR models and now in the simulator. And again, as I mentioned on the call just a minute ago, we'll collect those questions for a while because things are still settling with the simulator and the weights. But I'll make we'll give them all to Drew and make sure that we get those clarified once Drew's ready to do that.
Bruce?
Yeah, Iris, yeah.
Hi, I sent Jordan and copied you also this morning because I tried to open the spreadsheet to understand the simulator and I couldn't get it to print as a whole and I couldn't get to view it as a whole. So it was kind of, I couldn't make any sense out of it and I feel totally unprepared to discuss it. And I suggested that if we can't fix it electronically, I'd like to get a hard copy mailed to me before I get into some discussion of it.
Right, and we're not today in this meeting going to be discussing the simulator. That was really to get to the fiscal policy work group and just to introduce it. We'll go through it in detail at next Monday's full commission meeting. But in the meantime, I know you'd like to get access to it and look at its utility. I know Drew's on the call. You're muted right now. Is that or others on the screen here? Did others have you tried to download it and use it and you had the same problems? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I had the same problem, Bruce. Yeah.
Any advice, Drew, about accessing that?
I'm not sure what exactly the problems were, so I don't know that I have a lot of advice for the problem.
Well, the problem is that when you get it electronically, you have to scroll across and across and across and across. And when you go to print it, it won't print that way. All you get is the first 5 boxes and the first A to B towns. You get nothing more when you try and print it. And then if you try and follow it across the screen, you can't follow from left to right. It all doesn't fit, so you don't know what column you're looking at, which is why it would be much more useful in hard copy.
Okay, well, I will let Bruce speak to his ability to print it and figure out how to distribute hard copies.
Yeah, I mean, there are 35 columns to it.
Well, the issue with the hard copy, though, is you're only seeing one iteration. You can't play with anything and see what the changes are.
Right. I think the advantage is with it in Excel format, but I certainly understand if people want hard copy, we should find a way.
And, actually, and I provided the executive team with a password to unlock it. So I don't know if it's a password protection issue that you're having, but I will let the executive team deal with distributing the password as they see fit. And maybe once you have the password, you'll be able to play around with it and print it in a better way. Or,
I was finding things like freeze frame and whatever didn't work on it.
Yeah, it's protected. So so once you get the password, and I was able to, I shouldn't say this, fiddle with it, Drew, and I was able to find the password. And so it prints perfectly with a little adjustment. But Bruce, with the password, you and Jordan and team could easily create a printable version that you can distribute as PDF to people who want that. It's definitely doable. It's a great spreadsheet.
We'll do that with the next.
I shouldn't bypass passwords, Drew. Sorry.
Well, that'll be interesting. And you're able to view all 35 columns at a time?
If you work on it, if you want to print, yes, you can definitely, you can contract it very small and look at it all that way. But if you want to print it, you can coordinate the pagination so that it'll print, say, a certain number of columns that are visible on one page, and then it'll continue on the others. Bruce and team can easily create that that's satisfactory to any reader. It's very manipulative.
So,
We'll play with that and get that out soon. I'll work on that when I have some time.
That's a challenge for you.
Jordan, did you see my note about Matara?
Yes, I sent her the link.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anything else that we've got? Should we do some attendance taking and just?
Hey, you're going to go ahead and open the building. Matara was just trying to get the link. She'll be with us in a minute. But yeah, you can go ahead and open the meeting if you want.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm Jay Kahn, convening the Adequacy and Distribution Work Group of the Commission to Study School Funding. We'll go through the regular attendees of this work group and then ask for other members of the commission to identify themselves, where they're at. And then to our staff at CARSI and AIR, and then to our, and in the legislature, and then to our guests who are offering us some presentation today. So Jay Kahn, I'm present in Keene, and I don't think anyone else will be in this room. And Iris, see you next.
Unmuting. Hi, I'm joining you from my daughter's home and glad to be here.
Yeah, Barbara?
Hi, I'm here in Keene and husband in another room. So hello, Matora.
Val?
Val Zanchuk's alone in his office in Jaffrey.
Thank you. Jane?
Jane Bergeron here at home in Litchfield, and there's nobody here in the room except the Black Lab, Otis.
And Bill?
Home in Concord, thank you.
Welcome all. Let's see, other commission members, David?
Dave Luno, here in Hopkinton with Ozzy the long-haired dachshund.
Dick Ames?
I'm here in Jaffrey alone.
Thank you. Rick Ladd?
I'm here in Haverhill alone.
And Mel Myler?
Mel Myler in Port Clyde, Maine, alone.
And our CARSI leaders, Bruce?
Bruce Mallory is here in Kittery Point, Maine, in my home office alone.
Jordan?
Jordan Hensley here in Dover, and I'm alone in the room.
And Carrie? Almost Dr. Porter.
Carrie Portree in Dover alone.
And she is Dr. Portree.
Oh, yay.
Hey, that's great.
Dr. Carrie's okay too.
Yeah. And Drew?
Drew Atchison with AIR in Washington, D.C.
And Jennifer Four.
Hi, Jen Four calling in from Concord, home alone.
Thank you. Let's see, other people I see on the call. I see Nicole Highmark. Hello, Nicole. Thanks for joining us.
This is Nicole Highmark. I'm in Amherst, New Hampshire, and I'm in the room alone.
Okay, and I'm sure you'll be joined by Steve later in the conversation. And Matora Fiore, welcome. You're up first.
Hi guys. Hi Barbara. It's nice to see all of you and thank you for having me join in today. I'm alone in my room here. I do have a couple furry friends, so they might wander through. But I'm excited to talk about charter schools today and funding. We were looking at sharing some information about what works for funding for charter schools, what doesn't, maybe some recommendations, a little bit about what charter school programs are and how they interact with traditional public schools. So I tried to have a short presentation that kind of hits some of those items, and then certainly answer any questions that you have at the end. So let me do the technical thing where you fiddle around to do the screen share.
You do that, and I'll just remind our folks relative to our timing. We're about 3:10, so we've got 3 segments about equal time that we tried to apportion to this: the charter school presentation, the career and achievement information, and then a discussion of AIR's weighting that was shared with us last week. So we'll hopefully you'll leave us some time for questions and answers, Mentora.
I plan to, for sure. And it sounds like maybe the format here is best to save questions for the end, just because it's harder to see everybody. And is that how you guys have been doing it?
That sounds good.
Okay, yeah, okay, great. So the Zoom format is a little bit different. So I'm more used to presenting in front of live people and being able to see your faces and see what's going on. So bear with me if this is a little bit more dry than it would normally be. Can you see my screen? Just kind of nod, Jay, if you can see it. Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit about charter school funding, a little bit of the history and the current formula, and hopefully share some information, or some of it may be a refresher for some of you. So we will go along and see how we do. So I'm Mentora Fiore. I'm the chair of the New Hampshire Alliance for Public Charter Schools. I've also been the director for the Surrey Village Charter School since its inception. So been around for a while in charter school. So our school opened in 2006. So we have a little bit of history. Just wanted to review a little bit about what a charter school is in New Hampshire. So they're open enrollment schools, they're public schools of choice. So we still get that, you know, like, oh, but it's a private school kind of conversation here and there. So just, I can't ever talk about charter schools without mentioning that they are public schools. They're mission driven and created to fill a need in an area. So each charter school, wherever it has been promoted, designed, brought to be, has been because there was a need in that area for that particular type of mission. For state authorized schools, anybody in the state can attend any charter school if they can get there, if there's a space available. So for state authorized schools, you're not limited by your zip code. Charter schools are independent and tuition free. So sometimes when I describe charter schools, I say with caution that they look a little bit like a private school in that there's its own school board, it has its own budget, it has its own processes. So it kind of looks like a private school in that regard, but in every other way, it's public. Charter schools are accountable to both academic results and financial. So we have a number of different processes to make sure that everything is going smoothly at charter schools. We have yearly accountability, we have quarterly accountability, and then every 5 years we also go through the renewal process. So, and then there's a variety of other things in between. So highly accountable. For state authorized charter schools, we're accountable directly to the state. So just moving to the next slide, charter school authorization. So there's 2 types of authorization in our state currently. So there's district authorized schools, which goes through the voters at that town. So whatever that voting process is, that district authorization goes through those voters. So in the Keene area, we are mostly voter driven for that state or that district authorization. Larger places like Manchester, it might be the mayor and council whoever votes on the school budget votes for district authorization. There's only one state or one school in the state that has gone through district authorization. So of the 30 schools that have been authorized, one is district authorized. So I'll focus mostly on state authorization today. So state authorization is more typical. So we have 29 that are authorized right now. That doesn't mean 29 are open, but we do have 29 that are authorized at the moment. So this is where a group goes before the State Board of Education for authorization to open a charter school. That group can be a group of teachers, parents, or a nonprofit organization putting forth that charter document to get authorization. So those are the two types. Like I said, we'll, predominantly state authorized at this time. The next slide is kind of busy with lots of numbers, but it just kind of gives you an overview, a quick and dirty history of the state authorized charter school funding. So back in 2006, when our school opened, the per pupil amount that went to charter schools was $35.98. So that was at that time the adequacy amount. So it didn't have this state or this additional grant at that time. So as the years go by, you see a jump here in green. That's when that additional grant came into play. And the next slide will talk more about that. But you can see from 2008 to 2016, it held pretty steady around $5,000, $5,500, and then it jumped $1,000. So additional $1,000 came in that additional grant space. So again, some more time goes by, it increases a little bit, and it gets us to this $7,188. So again, that's state adequacy, that $3,700 that traditional public schools are getting right now, plus the additional grant, and that's how we get to that $7,100. So hold that number in your mind, and then we'll go to this slide. So I think that this slide really covers the kind of differences between traditional public school funding as well as state authorized and the locally authorized charter schools. So when you look at this chart, so at the top it says, according to the Department of Ed, for the 2018-19 school year, the average cost to educate a child in New Hampshire was a little more than $16,000. So kind of that's where our baseline is for some of these other numbers below. Then, so that comes, so that's the average for everybody in the state. So certainly there are some that are higher and some that are lower. Each of those students in the state, whether you're charter or traditional public school, each child gets or brings with it this base adequacy, the 370878. And as I'm sure you all know, that has not changed at all. So it wasn't adequate really back in whenever 2005 or 3, whenever it came to be, but it certainly isn't adequate now. So that's for traditional public schools. It's the exact same for state authorized charter schools. It's the exact same for locally authorized, district authorized charter schools. The next row is that additional grant that I kept alluding to. So in 2006, Maggie Hassan and Martha Fuller Clark worked really hard to help bring in this additional grant. And when we talked about it back then, we talked about it as sort of the difference between having local money following a child versus no local money following a child. So for traditional public schools, you'll see that there's a 0 in this. So traditional public schools are not getting this additional grant. State authorized charter schools are getting $3,479.22. So these two numbers here add up to that 7188 from that last slide. So there's that, you know, additional grant that has been increasing over the years to support charter schools because they don't access local tax dollars. The district woo. I was not expecting that to change color. The district authorized charter schools do not receive that additional grant because they're funded directly through their district. So they do access local tax dollars. So then that next column is that local tax dollars piece. And it's hard to come up with a number here, right? Because we're talking about averages. Every single district is going to have a different number here. So, you know, small districts like Harrisville that have an average pupil cost, you know, around $29,000, their number here is going to be different than places like Franklin, where their average cost is much smaller. But in general, from the Department of Ed, we were able to find out that approximately 62% of funding comes from local taxation. So if you look at that $16,000, 62% of that is about $10,000. So we just look at averages. Let's say for, you know, just discussion purposes that you know, local schools are getting around $10,000 from local taxes, and they're also getting this $3,700 for adequacy aid. You know, doing quick math, you can see that that does not add up to 16,000. So we'll talk about this next green box down below in a minute. And I circled these in red. This is the comparison. So charter schools aren't getting any money from local tax dollars, so that's why there's a 0 here, and hence the need for this additional grant. But it's easy to see that that 3,400 is quite different from the 10,000. So, so I typically say that charter schools are underfunded public schools, and that's how I come up with that information and why. Again, over here, the district authorized have a different formula for funding for their districts because they are district authorized. So down here at the bottom is the differentiated aid. This differentiated aid is the same for all public schools. So all of these numbers, every single student in the state is eligible for these things if they qualify in these categories. So it's exactly the same for traditional public schools, exactly the same for charter schools, district or state authorized. So these are amounts that are per pupil, and I suspect you guys already know about all this stuff. So for our school, this number, you know, on average, if you average it out throughout the whole school, is around $500. Statewide, it looks like it's higher to get us to that 16,000. So it looks like, just doing some quick math, 13, a little less than 3,000 that districts are accessing through the differentiated aid. So maybe they have higher free and reduced eligible students, that kind of thing. So that's like the big kind of comparison around funding. The next slide talks about like the relationship between traditional public schools and charter schools. So there's a lot of conversation around that. Predominantly schools, you know, both types of public schools are interacting through special education. So the local school district is legally and financially responsible for special education, and that relationship between traditional public schools and charter schools you know, is born, you know, is required basically through special education. I personally have found that to be a really good thing. It's been a great way for us to get to know our local districts and sort of force us to work together. You know, two different entities that are super busy, and we're able to do that. So the funding for that is worked out between the charter school and the district. So if you have specific questions about special education, I can certainly talk about them, but I don't want to take up too much time because it's a whole topic of itself. But in our area, we've done really well with it. The New Hampshire law also allows for charter schools and public, traditional public schools to share staff or costs or anything around staff, facility, and also tuition agreements. So the different schools throughout the state have different relationships with their local districts. So you can see these things happening throughout the state, and it's just kind of a school by school situation. Sometimes it's, it happens because of the way that the charter school was brought to be, and there's a group from a traditional school and a charter group trying to pull it all together, and they've made a really nice relationship and sharing of costs or other mutually beneficial arrangements. So there are different ways for charters and public schools to interact with one another. Here at the end, just conclusions. Like I said, charter schools I feel are underfunded public schools because of that discrepancy between not being able to access the local tax dollars and the amount of additional grants that we're receiving at this time. I think the current model works really well when the law is followed. So that's mostly in line, I think, with any difficulties that folks would have with special education. So special education, that process works really well if everybody's following the law. Recommendations, I would say, like I said at the beginning, I don't think the adequacy aid is adequate for anybody to have education in a well-rounded way. So increase adequacy aid for all public schools, including charter schools, and maintain that additional grant for public charter schools. Another way to do that is direct local funding to follow the child as it does in other states, and use that 80% rule that is in place for the district authorized schools. So those are two ways to increase funding for charter schools, because as I see them, they're underfunded at this time. And I believe that traditional public schools are also underfunded by the state. So, so that was as quick as I could go.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Yeah, sure. There'll be lots, but I just wanted to start with some clarification. When slide 5,
Yeah, sure.
just to help with the understanding on that one. We've been talking about a $19,800 average per pupil on spending. And the difference there is the transportation is left out of the 16,000 number. So that, just wanted to clarify it.
Okay, great.
So this a second thing I wanted to clarify is that the average being spent by the state per pupil based on fiscal 21 numbers, and I think these here are close to, yeah, they're for the charters are close for 21, fiscal 21. Anyway, it's $2,300 more on average per pupil. So it's around $6,000 per pupil using the disparity aid that might be considered a one-time adjustment for fiscal 21, and that it doesn't carry forward to future fiscal years.
Gotcha. So you're saying the average here is around 2,300.
Yes, that's right. When you take 168,000 students and divide. So and I guess so what I wanted to get to, and frankly, I don't know that I understood that there was additional funding on top of the base and additional grants to the charter schools, but that's great to hear the clarification that you keep accounting in the same manner that the publics do and get reimbursed in that manner. But I guess what I wanted to ask is, we've been benchmarking a lot of the costs for that schools experience, and have you done any, is there any benchmarking? It's not you, but I mean, just the state of New Hampshire compared to what the average cost at a charter school might be nationally, how do we differ from the funding models that exist for charter schools relative to other examples that there are around the country?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but I know in the past that we've been one of the lowest, if not the lowest, state in terms of funding for charter schools. At one point, Utah was neck and neck with us, but like I said, I haven't, in a couple of years, I haven't looked at that data. So I could certainly get that information and send it out to the committee.
I think a benchmark, just whatever the source of the benchmark is, I think
Yep.
Carsey's been doing a good job of inventorying those
Great.
forms. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to have that data.
And I'm sure the special education, while that's a complicated area, I know that we're concerned about how that influences the cost of in the public schools to take on the services that are needed for special education services for fair and appropriate educational opportunity. So yeah, and Jane Bergeron-Bolio is just, on the call. She no doubt follows that more closely. So if you want to take a shot at that, or Jane, if you wanted to add any kind of clarification, sharpen up on what that question ought to be for Matora relative to what's the burden that public schools need to accept to provide the fair, appropriate education.
Well, I guess one of my questions would be around the column that's empty here is cost per pupil for a student with a disability. And is the state of New Hampshire collecting any data that would inform us in terms of the average cost per pupil for a student with a disability who's attending a charter school? We realize that the onus of paying those bills is on the school district, but what is the average cost per pupil for a student with a disability who's enrolled in a charter school?
Yeah, so I think we can all agree that the cost for a special ed student is not this $1,900, $2,000, right? That's coming from the differentiated aid. So it's certainly not that. And as you all know, every student is different and requires different services. So I think it's a complicated question. I don't know that the department is collecting the information in terms of like how much each student costs and what that looks like in terms of, are there cost savings to the district? Is it all new costs? Those kinds of things. So I think it's a really complicated question with a difficult answer to find, because each school district, and student is going to be a little bit different. It's not as easy as, so I live in the town of Surrey that tuitions its traditional public school children to Keene. So the town of Surrey gets a bill for special education students, and that's just a blanket cost. So for each special education student in Surrey that goes to a Keene school, it's about $40,000 in tuition. The charter schools don't do it that way. So there isn't a like, oh, it's going to cost, $10 or $20 or $30,000 for a special education student to come to our school. If they just need speech and language once a week, it might be, whatever the cost of that speech and language person is once a week, and that's it. So I don't know how you get that question without answers, without going pretty deep and finding out all of these specifics. So Jane, if you had other ways to do it, happy to hear about it.
Well, I just want to clarify. So at this point, the Department of Ed does not collect that kind of information and at this point? Is that what
I
we're
don't
hearing?
think so. I think they've just started collecting like the information in terms of which students are in charter schools that you know are identified. They have not asked me for how much each one of them costs, or how much I bill back the district, or how much the district, you know.
So it's the local school districts and the local taxpayers who are paying the cost for students with disabilities who are enrolled in charter schools, correct?
Correct. So you know, those taxpayers, those parents that live in that town pay taxes, and so that money then supports their child in a charter school.
A related special ed question, if I could.
Yeah.
What data, do you have data about the number of special education students who receive catastrophic aid allocation from their local school districts that are in public charter schools?
I don't have that information. So CAT aid stays with the local school districts. So so I don't have that information for my school. So I don't know if the state collects that data for CAT aid.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Jane.
I've got another question. It's not specific to special education, but as we look at the chart that's in front of us right now, and we think about the cost per student, and you've got traditional public schools, you've got the state authorized charter schools. When a charter school student comes in, and they're also getting scholarship money from, say, the New Hampshire Children's Scholarship Fund, does that money go into the charter school above and beyond the monies that you have listed here?
Honestly, I don't know anything about the scholarship fund. So no students have come to our school with that scholarship fund. So I don't, maybe Matt would have that information, but I don't. I'm sorry.
I believe that's correct, that I don't think there's any charter school in the state that receives money. Those are only private schools that receive that.
Okay.
Could we get clarification on that, Jay?
Sure. I got the list, and that's public. Yep.
Jay, I've got a question, Jay. Looking at this chart that's in front of us, isn't it true that as a result of a charter school being able to do different kinds of things and not being able to, not having to deal with some of the restrictions that public schools have, that part of the charter is to provide outside money that's collected or raised through businesses or whatever to fill the void that you've already outlined, if that's one of the tasks that's in the charter.
Charter schools are able to do fundraising, and we certainly do it. For our school, we find it to be an important community piece. So it's one way to reach out to your community and get folks involved. I don't think it's the expectation that that we would raise the majority of the needed funds to run the school. As you know, it's time consuming and all those other things, but it does certainly play a part in funding the schools.
But it is expected that charter schools do raise money outside to help fill that void, correct?
You know what, honestly, I don't know if it's in the law or not, or if it's just an option so that charter schools are allowed to do that.
I believe it is in the law.
Okay.
Yeah. It is.
Jay, I've got a question.
Go, Bill.
In this in this summary that you've laid out, I have a conceptual question. There are so many costs of the traditional public school system are capital in nature. They're kind of fixed for a longer period of time than a year, and they are not really immediately variable, like many current expenditures would. How would you recommend to the commission that proper protections be put in place so that any funding mechanism protects traditional public schools from an elimination of revenue that's really designed to cover more fixed cost, at least for a period of years, even if a particular student, you know, is to move, the costs are stranded. And in other environments like electric utility regulation, those stranded costs have to be paid for. And they're separate from the new setting. So how do you look at this and describe to me the protections that are in there for traditional public school who have those stranded costs?
Are you asking me, or did you ask Jay?
No, ask you.
Okay, yeah, sure.
As with your familiarity with these transitions.
Yeah, well, I've always been surprised that this adequacy aid didn't have a natural way to increase. So over the years, as those costs are incurred in traditional public schools or in charter schools, you know, the cost of healthcare and providing raises to staff and, you know, modifications to building, like those things, I think is what you're saying, those things all increase.
Well, no, I'm actually saying that if the number of students in the traditional system, and you know, school boards build those systems, build the capital for a projection, if they are subsequently reduced due to regulatory changes, those costs continue for a period of years. And I don't see an immediate concept in here, except maybe that, you know, that there's something in the local tax dollar. There should be a recognition that those costs are stranded still in the traditional system and shouldn't just simply be moved to a new setting without some compensating mechanism.
And I think your point, Bill, is that capacity's been built.
Yeah.
Needs
to still
be
has
in place.
Cost. It doesn't go down immediately.
And needs to be in place in case of a shift back to the public because of the financial health of the charter school.
Yeah, in classic cases, you incur a bond, $20 million for facility improvement. If a bunch of kids leave, you still have the cost of the bond. It seems like, you know, that there has to be mechanisms to protect, you know, due to regulatory change, protect existing systems from unexpected stranded cost suffering.
Right, and I think maybe the committee knows more than I do at this point in terms of, in the past, I know that students that like there was a 3-year delay on payments, you know, there was, you were looking back in time. And then there was also a period of time where the state continued to fund those students for a number of years going forward. So I don't know how much that has changed.
That's exactly the kind of concept that I think should be built in to protect against leaving one system with stranded costs.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there was a little tiny bit in there, you know, a year or to 3, but I honestly haven't kept up with that for traditional public schools.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jay Iris had her hand up a minute ago.
Yeah, maybe we could take this slide down and we can just see all the participants and see if there are any other questions. We're getting close to where we're gonna run out of time.
Well, my question isn't directly about specific numbers, but it's tied to the idea of public funding. Originally, when charter schools were conceived, the idea was that there would be extra accountability in exchange for extra flexibility. And over the time, as New Hampshire's charter school laws have evolved, my understanding is that extra accountability has not materialized substantially. And given that, you know, only 1 out of the 30 authorized have been authorized at the local level by the people who would be paying the bills. And therefore also only 1 out of 30 has any direct public oversight. Because once you remove the local school board from the equation, whatever oversight is being done at DOE cannot be the equivalent of the eyes of a local publicly elected school board. So I would be interested in knowing your thoughts. You described charter schools in New Hampshire as highly accountable. I'd like to understand better in what ways they are more highly accountable than traditional public schools.
Yeah, sure.
For the use of public dollars.
Yep. So we do have a school board. So I don't know, are there specific accountability pieces? That
no, but your school board is not publicly elected and therefore is not publicly accountable.
Okay. So would you like me to just go through what the accountability pieces are that our school has? Would that be helpful?
I'd like to understand how charter schools in New Hampshire are more highly accountable than traditional public schools, which was the original framework under which they were established.
Gotcha. Well, I can tell you what is highly accountable for the current schools. So we are accountable to our school board. We do have public minutes and public board meetings that happen monthly. We provide financial statements to the department quarterly. We also have a yearly audit. We provide all the accountability through that every traditional public school has in terms of titles. So Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, all that money is just the same as a traditional public school. We have an accountability report that is submitted to the Department of Ed every year. And we also have that 5-year renewal process where outsiders come in from the school, and there's a process to go through in terms of making sure that the charter is following what it's supposed to and can remain open. Those are the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Are any of those requirements above and beyond what traditional public schools are required to be accountable for?
Off the top of my head, I don't have all the information about traditional public schools, so I would feel uncomfortable trying to compare a direct comparison to the two.
Okay, thanks. I just think that this issue is something the group would want to explore if and when we get to the issue of accountability in general.
Sure. Jane.
Could you just quickly walk us through that 5-year review in terms of accountability and what that looks like, including the financial aspect?
Sure. So it's there is a process where you submit a 5-year renewal document that talks about all the things that have been accomplished, things that you've done, keeping track of all those things. So that gets submitted and reviewed, and then there's an on-site process where you go through the entire binder of the 5-year renewal. So that includes documentation for your board minutes. It includes documentation around facilities and fire inspections, health inspections, all those inspection pieces that are needed to ensure safety at schools. There are groups that come together to reflect back and give feedback around, parents, board members, community members, and staff. And then there's the student accountability, so test scores, all of those things in terms of what you have in your charter for how you're going to assess students and in which way. So all of those things are reviewed in person, and the committee observes in classrooms and talks to these various groups to gather information, and then reports back to the State Board of Education.
Is there any conversation around special education and accountability on the part of the charter school?
I have not experienced that, and I think because the financial and legal responsibility lies with the district, I think any kind of review of special education likely comes through that auditing process. But I think it comes up in discussion and like, how is that relationship going and those kinds of things, but not the legal aspect of special education.
Thank you.
We're at the end of our time. May I ask a couple lightning round questions? We have 3 outcomes that we are using to assess the performance of schools: graduation rates, absentee rates, and test scores. Do you report all of those similar outcomes to the state board?
So we're a K-8, but we do report out grade advancement into 9th grade, certainly, and attendance. And what was the third thing? Sorry.
Well, there's no I guess graduation, completion of 8th grade. And
test scores.
And test scores, right.
Test scores, that would be the,
yep.
You do the test scores and
right.
apply that, do the same grade level testing 3 through 8 as public schools.
Right, so any state testing, so national testing, we participate in. So back in the day it was NECAP, and then it was, now we've got New Hampshire SAS, as well as NEAP. I mean, we also get selected for NEAP.
You've got proficiency rates by grade level.
Yep.
You do the NEAP as well as the SAS.
Yeah, we've been selected randomly every year.
I wanted to ask this one other. So my recall of our, I'll call it a categorical funding. That's essentially, the funds that are outside of the adequacy formula. We've talked about as being categorical for like building aid might be. There's $44 million, as I recall, for fiscal 21 for charter schools. There is a enrollment cap that each school has that if you add up to 30, I think adds to 4,000 students. So when we look at that, I said 6,000 per student that's being spent on the public side, it would seem that there's an $11,000 amount when you put all the other costs in for charters that would add that 6,000 is comparable to $11,000 per student at charters. Then am I doing the math correctly, or is there any other intervening step that's left out in that math? Or should I ask that question of somebody at the Board of Education?
Caitlin Davis is probably the right, I could speculate on some things, but Caitlin has she's got to nail down on specifics, exactly all those numbers, I think.
Do you think Surrey, Surrey obviously winds up spending out of state dollars or getting out of state dollars more than $7,100 per pupil?
Correct. So for Surrey, so we get the 7,100, and then I said, the differentiated A, the free and reduced, and the ELL, and the third graders not proficient is about $500 if you average that over the whole school. And then there's title funding. So that's formula based. So we do get Title I, Title II, and Title IV.
Yeah, which would be part of the 19,000 comparable on the state side.
Right, it would be, yeah. So those are relatively small for us. So we only have 100 students. So Title II is, we get $5,000. And Title I this year was $20,000. So, pretty small, relatively less than, excuse me, an average of 500 per student.
Mentora, thank you for standing in for Matt and being the president of the association. That it comes with your pay advance.
Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your insights.
Sure. And thank you all for all of your hard work. This is a big, big project. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
And next, we take a short breather, but Nicole Highmark is newly appointed as why don't you tell us your employment relationship that you have, and Steve can tell us about the makeup of the organization and what his role is, and then you've got a set of slides that maybe already have teed up those questions. Sorry, I couldn't review it in advance.
Oh, that's fine. So sure thing. So my name's Nicole Highmark, and I come here this afternoon wearing a few hats. First, I am the director of the New Hampshire Alliance for College and Career Readiness, which is a Nellie Mae Education Foundation project that sits within Reaching Higher, New Hampshire. And then I am also the executive director of NICTA, which is the professional association that supports our career and technical education centers and their directors on a statewide basis. So we try to have a statewide impact affecting all of our local centers. So that's my introduction, and I'll let Steve jump in as I pull up a slide deck.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think I know most of you on this call. My name is Steve Rothenberg. I'm the Career Technical Director in Concord. I'm a longtime board member with the organization that Nicole is the executive director of. I'm very happy that I was president for 5 years and someone else has now taken over. So that's always good news for people on this call who I'm sure are a million committees. I'm also a committee chair for the Community College Board for the Student Success Committee, and I've been involved in sort of this shifting of redefining college career readiness for a lot of years, and I look forward to talking to you today.
Thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Okay, and I'm hoping folks can see my screen.
All set.
Terrific, thank you. So this slide deck was a joint effort of both New Hampshire CTE and the Alliance for College and Career Readiness. Just by way of a bit of background, the Alliance has been around for 3 years. We're actually entering year 4, and we are a coalition organization. So that means we have membership and partners, and our membership represents a range of K-12, post-secondary, nonprofit, and business and industry sectors. And we all have this shared common goal of college and career readiness for the students of New Hampshire. So our mission is to foster an environment where Granite Staters both recognize the value of post-secondary readiness, and that we also impact indicators and measures of post-secondary readiness within our students. And we do that through both policy engagement, sustained and strategic communications, and then coordinated efforts of all our partners. And then the other thing I'll highlight here, and I think it's particularly important for the work of this group, is that we have a very, very broad view of college and career readiness. So that's a deliberate word choice, college and career readiness, not college or career readiness. And that's largely because the same skills are needed whether you're going to be college or career ready, whether you go to a 4-year institution or a 2-year institution, whether you enter the workforce with an industry recognized credential from a secondary or post-secondary institution. So that's a really important element to norm around. And we're also trying to impact the language we use when we talk about readiness. And really it's post-secondary readiness we're looking for in students, because we want to value multiple pathways for our students. So that's just a bit of background. oh, we jumped forward a little bit. Here's just a showcase of some of our partners. Oftentimes we hear, so who is involved from business and industry, or who is involved from New Hampshire nonprofits? So we like to offer folks a visual of those folks. And for the last 3 years, the Alliance has largely been working on a data project. And we've encountered a lot of ups and downs on this data project, but it has been in pursuit of post-secondary indicators of success for our students. And we had a set of guiding research questions that have informed this project along the way, and the project is still underway. And that is, what does post-secondary readiness look like across New Hampshire? Are there differences within and across the counties of New Hampshire? Do students experience college and career readiness differently? And more importantly, do all students have access to rigorous course offerings? So we're going to begin a bit with some enrollment data, and I'm going to go through these particular slides rather quickly. Because I'm well aware that many of you are very well informed about New Hampshire enrollment, but we do like to project them in a slightly different way, in a graphical representation. So what you see on the screen here is high school enrollment over the last 10 years, so 2009 to 2019. And we've taken a snapshot of it by county to observe those changes. And I think a number of things will jump off the page for you. First off, and by no surprise, we've seen about a 14% decline in high school enrollment over the last 10 years. And the largest rate of decline was in Coos County, a very rural county for New Hampshire. And then we also take and pay special attention to some of our more populated counties. So Hillsborough County, where a third of all New Hampshire high school enrollment sits, declined by 16%. And then interestingly, Rockingham, which is along the seacoast, saw the lowest drop of all these counties among high school enrollment. But where this story changes, and my slides are moving forward on a slight delay, so I apologize for that, is the middle school enrollment. So we also tracked these same enrollment trends at both the New Hampshire middle school level and the elementary level within the same 10-year time period. And I want to draw your attention specifically to Rockingham County here. We see a significant shift when we begin to look at the enrollment at the middle school level. And in fact, Rockingham, within that 10-year period, had the second highest drop. So it's really important for us to be tracking these enrollment numbers by cohort and thinking about how these cohorts of students, what did those numbers look like when they get into both high school and then their post-secondary choices. So that gives some context to our data. And then as we begin to look at indicators, and some of them have already been highlighted here, we jump to New Hampshire high school graduation rates. And as I get into some of this hard data, I do want to highlight that this is not Alliance or New Hampshire CTE generated data. Rather, we have accessed a number of sources for this data, and we have simply put it into charts, tables, and graphical representations for you. So a lot of this data comes from the New England Secondary School Consortium. They have a common data project, which is a consortium of the New England states, and they've come to a set of agreements and an MOU on these annual reports that are pushed out. And I've included access to these annual reports in the resource and reference page. But as we look at New Hampshire high school graduation rates from really 2014 to 2018, New Hampshire has had among the highest rates of graduation, both in the region, New England, and nationally. So you see here, this is the New England average for 2018, which was 88%. In that same year, 2018, the New Hampshire average was 89%. So we're trying to give you some points of comparison and contextual elements. And the other important item to note on these slides is the differences by subgroup. So in this particular slide, you see that we track outcomes by gender, by our free and reduced lunch eligible students, English language learners, and students with IEPs and individualized education plans. And unfortunately, you'll see an all too often trend where we have quite significant differences in outcomes across these population groups. We also track the same metric by racial and ethnic status. And again, you see similar trends when we begin to look at different populations and different outcomes for those different populations. So another interesting element, and this has largely been a CTE effort, and I will say the CTE data on the statewide basis is not the easiest data to come by. We have to use federal resources to access this data. But what's fascinating is when we look at graduation rates among our CTE concentrators, and Steve, do you want to tell them what a concentrator is?
Yeah, the old model was a student who, if you had 4 semesters of CTE, which is 2 years, if you started the 3rd semester, 5/8 of the way through, the new definition is a little less than that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Steve. So consistently over time, we've seen about a 97% graduation rate among our CTE concentrators. So you see very little variability in those numbers. And that has consistently been a graduation rate that's 8 to 10 percentage points higher than our traditional sort of normalized high school rates. And just again, by way of background, there's a lot of applied and hands-on learning within our CTE centers. And it's learning that is very much focused on career and post-secondary or higher education pathways. So this is something the Alliance, and I know CTE wants to dig more deeply into. So from there, we jump to college enrollment, persistence, and completion. And I'm going to give you the definitions for each of these as I walk you through these data elements. But something I want to highlight, the Alliance has sort of had a soft launch or a soft rollout of this data over the last year. And the greatest sensitivity to this project and this data that we witness across the board, regardless of the audience, is to our college enrollment, persistence, and completion numbers. And that's in part because they are lower. Two of the measures are lower in a statistically significant way from both national and regional averages. So first we look at college enrollment. And again, this is pulled from the New England Secondary School Consortium, their common data project. And the New England Secondary School Consortium uses data from the National Student Clearinghouse. And so what the National Student Clearinghouse does to generate these numbers is they match state high school graduation records with college enrollment records. So the point being is that this data that you're seeing on this slide right now is college enrollment for any New Hampshire high school student, regardless of whether they attended an institution in state or out of state. And it captures 2- and 4-year institutional enrollment. And enrollment is kind of has a narrow definition. It is defined as a student who enrolled in college by October 15th following their high school graduation. So within, a handful of months after high school graduation. So here you see the regional average for college enrollment is 66% for the New England states. New Hampshire has consistently been below the regional and national average for college enrollment. And in 2018, our enrollment rate was at 58%. So we've witnessed a great deal of sensitivity to this, and probably discussion about college enrollment can be its own conversation, because we know there are many, many layers to this data element, particularly in the state of New Hampshire. So we then jump to college persistence. And again, this is for any New Hampshire high school graduate who attended a 2 or 4 year institution, both in or out of state, and comes from the National Student Clearinghouse. So for persistence, you see an average of about 85%, I'm sorry. And for New Hampshire, that persistence is at 82.4, so about 82% if we're rounding. College persistence also has a fairly narrow definition in that it is defined as college enrollees re-enrolling for a 3rd semester in their 2nd year of college. And I would also highlight on this slide, we are seeing a closing of sort of that gap between the New England regional average and the New Hampshire average for persistence. And then the last number is college completion. And college completion actually has a very generous definition, unlike the other two, in that it seeks to find the number of students who earned a 2 or 4 year degree within 6 years of entering college. So many of us think of college as a 2 or 4 year experience. This gives a buffer on that and looks for completion within a 6 year time frame. And more interestingly, we're beginning to see organizations track this number along an 8 year time frame. And I highlight that because that's a factor to consider when we explore the cost of post-secondary education and student loan debt among students. This is the area where New Hampshire really shines and tends to exceed both the New England and the national average. So when you look at the 2012 number, we see a 70.5% completion rate. And when we look at the 2011 number, that's a 67.1 completion rate. So what does this have to do with our public schools and the programming our students receive at that level? And that brings us to this notion of what are the mile markers, or what data is available to New Hampshire high schools, to New Hampshire communities and commissions like this, that give us sort of an indication of progress onto post-secondary pathways and post-secondary success. I think AIR calls these the intermediary measures within their report. So there are a couple of things to highlight here. First, I want to set up that the data set for these mile markers is very limited. And this might be a policy element that the commission wants to think about. New Hampshire really is a data desert in the available information on student experiences and student outcomes. So we really have limited information with which we can work. So in 2015, 2016, the Office of Civil Rights did a special data collection. So again, this was a federal data collection, and it was STEM focused. And they sought to collect information on science, technology, and engineering and math among all the states across the country. So I highlight that because this is older data, but it is what we have access to. And one of those mile markers and one of those STEM pieces was middle school algebra. And what students, or do all students, have access to algebra at their middle school, whether it's at an elementary, a middle school in an elementary school, or a true middle school. And we saw back in 15, 16 that approximately 60% of the middle schools offered at least one algebra course to students. Now, algebra is important because algebra is the foundation of all mathematics going forward and is a very strong indicator of both secondary outcomes and career outcomes for students. So similarly, OCR, the Office of Civil Rights, looked at this data by student group. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but again, sort of reminding you of those differences in outcomes we saw for different population groups. So we see very small percentages of English language learners and students with IEPs engaging in an algebra experience at the middle level. We also track again, that same narrative, that same storyline as we dig into different racial and ethnic populations. So then after we looked at algebra, we also looked at calculus offerings. And again, this is from the same data set because this is all that's available in New Hampshire at this time on this topic. And we actually saw that a very large number of high schools at that time offered at least one calculus course to students. And it was interesting, when OCR collected this data, they had one high school that reported as many as 16 different calculus courses within their high school. So we have some high schools with none, some high schools with one, and some high schools as many as 16. Just elevating conversations around access and equity to learning and rigorous course offerings for students. OCR also looked at this data for advanced placement courses. So not that AP is the be all and end all, but just happens to be one of those rigorous course offerings available in our high school. And in 15-16, about 80% of our high schools had students enrolled in AP courses. Interestingly, when we start to dig into some of the regional data on AP courses and specifically outcomes in AP courses, New Hampshire has one of the lowest averages in terms of students scoring a 3 or higher on AP exams across the board. With Vermont sort of a second close behind them. Again, you know, I'm putting that disclaimer in there that AP by all means is not the be all and end all, but just some contextual data for folks to consider as we look at these rigorous course offerings. And then probably one of our most interesting ahas and something the Alliance was really committed to was this notion of dual and concurrent enrollment. And New Hampshire for some time has had a very, very robust dual and concurrent enrollment program offered with the Community College of New Hampshire. And actually more recently, those opportunities have been expanding into other higher ed institutions here in New Hampshire. So when we saw this data from 15-16 from the Office of Civil Rights, we knew it was not accurate in 2019 and 2020. So we worked very closely with the community college system to get a better accounting of what those numbers are. So in 15-16, you see the Office of Civil Rights, again, federal reporting was only reporting that 60% of New Hampshire high schools had some sort of dual enrollment offering. Running Start is one of the opportunities through our community college system that comes through dual and concurrent enrollment. And we knew both at the Alliance, the community college, and I know Steve can really speak to this through the dual and concurrent offerings at Concord Regional Technical Center, that we have just seen an explosion, an expansion of students taking advantage of these types of courses. And on one level, that really communicates sort of a values and relevancy to students and their families because these courses enable students to acquire both high school credit and college credit before entering high school. You'll also notice that we identify not by student, but by course registrations. And that's simply because one student takes more than one course many times. So that's how these numbers are captured. This is a data element, however, that we need state support from a state education agency point of view, because while we can access these numbers and some elements through the community college system, they do not have access to the number of students with an IEP, the number of students who are on free and reduced lunch, the number of English language learners taking a dual and concurrent enrollment. So we're really restricted right now in how we can look at this data. And then I just want to jump into CTE, and this is really Steve's world. So I'll encourage him to jump in as he sees fit. Again, just by way of background, New Hampshire has 20 career and technical regions and about 30 CTE centers serving all our high school students across the state. So each high school falls within a designated region and has access to one or more centers. This data that you're looking at is taken again from a federal snapshot from the Perkins data and the Perkins portal that anyone can access. And it displays where and how we're tracking high interest among learners in CTE programs. So you see a lot of interest in education and training, as well as the health sciences here in New Hampshire, followed by information technology and architecture and construction. And then here's just some national data to be aware of in terms of outcomes and what CTE learners or their families are reporting. This would be a really interesting element for us to collect on a statewide basis. You know, we don't have it at this point, but it's fascinating to see how both learners and families are reporting on their CTE opportunities. And then the other sort of outcome data that we have available on the statewide basis is the SAT. And something of note when we look at the SAT is the scores you're seeing here, or the percentage of students in a state that meet benchmark or proficiency on the SAT. This is taken from the junior test day. So a single administration of that test. We all know that many students take the SAT more than once, but the significance of the junior test day is by having the SAT as the statewide assessment, it eliminates access issues and barriers for students because it is a fee-based test. And currently the state is covering that. That's fairly significant because it engages students who wouldn't normally choose to take or have the money to take the SAT, take it. And many, after engaging in the SAT, self-identify as college ready or post-secondary ready, whereas they weren't seeing themselves that way prior. Again, we've provided some regional context here. The one New England state you see missing is Massachusetts, and that is because Massachusetts does not have a junior SAT test day. They have a different statewide assessment. So on that, there are other future data elements that the Alliance has been considering as we think about, you know, what should be viewed on a statewide basis as college and career readiness indicators or post-secondary readiness indicators. We know we have extended learning opportunities available on a statewide basis. There's a lot of question and discussion about how that data is captured and that it's not truly reflective of what's occurring in our schools. We don't really have a statewide effort right now in collecting work-based learning. We have this great piece of legislation, Drive to 65, and our workforce accelerator focus on 65 by 25, which we'll get into in a few moments. But we also have students leaving schools with industry recognized credentials or career credentials. We know that school counselors play a critical role in the pathways students choose to pursue at the middle and high school level. So what sort of data should we have available, or do we have available on school counselors and their preparation? Emergency credentials. This is data that the DOE has right now. Should we be looking at that in terms of a regional snapshot or a content snapshot? Because that speaks to educators in the classroom who may not necessarily have the preparation to be providing services in a classroom without the necessary background or expertise. The same with teaching outside a major assignment. And then there are interesting efforts underway with school districts about student aspirations, post-secondary aspirations. In fact, this is of strong interest to the Alliance within the context of this pandemic, and our student aspirations changing as a result of the impact of the global pandemic and financial situation, both in terms of individual families and institutions of higher ed, and then New Hampshire scholars. So I highlight this because I've talked about how there are many things we should and could be tracking, but we don't have access to that data yet, and that would be a really important policy consideration. So in closing, Steve and I really want to focus on Senate Bill 276, which is now law and in effect. And the New Hampshire Alliance recently pushed out a TA to all our partners on this great piece of legislation. And you can see you have the link to our TA within this slide. But there are some responsibilities outlined in this bill that speak to some of those data elements that I've already highlighted that we don't yet have access to. So this bill, or this law, now provides a wonderful entry into beginning and conceptualizing what other data elements could look like. And I'll highlight that Senator Khan was the sponsor, the spirit behind this bill. And Steve wants to highlight how the Concord Regional Technical Center has really been thinking about this concept of career pathways and how they can monitor data on a local level here. So Steve, I'm going to hand this off to you.
It's always hard to come after Nicole. She does such a complete job, but I want to give you a few bits and feels of what it looks like on the ground. So when we think about career pathways, and I think about this whole discussion, and I think about all our talks we've had over the years, including folks like Ross Cattell, our goal is to get people on pathways. Our goal is to demonstrate college career readiness by signing up not part-time to go to college, but full-time to go to college, because you see all that data around Complete College for America. So when you think about career and technical education, but really, in my context, entire Concord High School, these bullets are what it looks like when we talk to students and parents about what we're trying to do for you to get you college and career ready. And these manifest themselves in our curriculum and our activities in the center. And you saw some of these titles previously with Drive to 65. Nicole, if you could just flip the page, it'd be great. This is a simple example. When Drive to 65 came out, and as well as some of the work we did with New Hampshire scholars, it raised these issues that a lot of the metrics associated with the career side of college career readiness are not being captured. They're being captured in informal ways. When I give talks about this to folks, I just do a super simple exercise. I say, okay, how do you measure college readiness? Everybody in the room's got the list of 5 to 10 things. I mean, we all grew up with it. It's a no-brainer. But when you start talking about career readiness, people stumble. And so the first and foremost we have to normalize some of these metrics that you saw in the previous slides around work-based learning, for example, or industry recognized certificates. Or the state of Ohio, for example, gets deeply into how a student demonstrates soft skills. I mean, it seems like something very difficult to measure, but all these states across the country are attempting to gather this data and make it into something. This little glimpse, without explaining the whole thing, is sort of setting standards for work-based learning in the Concord Regional Technical Center, aligning to national state expectations so that students get an idea of what it means to reach a certain level. Obviously, our aspiration is that they'll get to level 4 when they finish high school. Or level 4 might be a ticket to get the Drive to 65 recognition. But the reason I show it to you simply is because these things are just still being defined right now. They're not even collected. If you could hit the slide one more, Nicole, would be great. This document here, Nicole, looks like you did a little more of a rub out there, which is fine. So I know it's a little hard to see, okay? But I want you to visualize, if you can see this document, like me, you might need to get closer to your screen. I apologize in advance. But you'll notice that the first 6 lines say culinary and pastry arts. That is one student. So that student has 6 records in this database. The first record is a dual enrollment course they completed. They did not complete. One is a certificate. Another is they completed a career technical program. They earned the career pathway certificate. I'm going down a list. And they were a New Hampshire scholar. And the last one was they completed a work-based learning level 2 experience at Tuckaway Tavern. And so what you see here is a glimmer of data collection on a student-by-student basis by the end of their career in career and technical education. But it's not limited to career and technical education. This could be an ELO, it could be whatever it is, on using these key metrics and forming a sort of dossier on every student. This sort of oomph to do this came out of ESSA. When ESSA came through and got modified a bit, it became sort of, we got to start tracking this data. The game went up when New Hampshire Scholars stepped in, and then Drive 65 stepped in to further make demands on quantifying this data and getting it done. I don't show this to you like it's the most perfectly normalized data. We're working to get it more normalized, but we say that story, and as you go down the list, you can see the Construction 2 student down and below, what kind of data you collect to show college and career readiness. For our college, for our computer engineering class, there's an AP exam in there because its AP exam is linked to the class. But we're trying to sort of get this data into one location as we tackle this concept of it really, to some degree, you know, college career readiness, what you completed here, looping back to things like 65 by 25 and earning a credential as you travel. You know, one more click, Nicole, then I'll pause. I think that I might be, yeah. So if you go back one for me, just where I was, you know, and so you know, this is sort of this glimpse of this sort of balanced approach to measuring college and career readiness in some way, shape, or form. I'll pause there.
Yeah, so I think we'll end the presentation there. We don't need to highlight the executive findings for you. I would also say we cited everything on each slide, but here's an additional list of resources and references for those of you who really like to dig into the data yourselves. And I know there are many of you on this, this call today. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Steve. Steve, I know when you show that transcript, Concord Regional is indeed one of the leaders, probably the leader in the state, and so it's rudimentary, but that's exciting to see that the transcript is underway, and you know, you can provide that leadership to Nicole and the statewide group. That's wonderful to see.
Yeah, it reflects our coverage.
Dozens of questions obviously up here, but it was Susan and Val that most were interested in career readiness and achievement, and do we capture the data? So I think you summarized you know, some findings that I think this commission can identify about future information needs. But I wonder what if they, maybe we can take down the slides and just see who's prepared with a question. But I guess I'd invite, I don't see either Val or.
Oh, Val's there.
There you are. Sorry, right in front of me.
Right in front of you.
Val, what do you think?
Paul in right now.
Well, I mean, to me, you know, when we talk about adequacy, I always ask myself, adequate for what purpose? And to me, the career and college readiness is the purpose of the adequacy, not to just take a test or to complete, you know, 4 years of English and 4 years of social studies, which seems to be part of the definition that we have to deal with now. But I think this is the true measure of adequacy. You know, are the people leaving high school in a position to, be on the pathway towards, a productive role as a citizen in our country and our state. And I think these are the measures that we need to make. And one of the things that Nicole and I talked about, we were speaking a few weeks ago. I think I'll paraphrase you, Nicole, but you talked about algebra. And if you look at that algebra slide, the number of students taking algebra in the middle school is fairly low. But one of the secondary effects of those courses being offered is that the rigor of the entire school went up, even though not all the students were taking algebra. Just the fact that algebra was offered in the school raised the level of performance in the school. So very rigorous programs like that have a broad effect even on the students who aren't necessarily taking the course. So I think there are a lot of elements here about the type of programs we should have where, yes, there are kids taking advantage of them directly, but there's a ripple effect that goes through the entire school that helps raise the level of all the students. And I'm not sure if algebra is the only thing that does that, but that was the one that Nicole was mentioning. And I thought that was a very interesting observation, that these key courses can raise the level of performance of the entire school, even though 10% of the kids are taking the course.
Yep, good observation. I see David's hand up, and Rick, you may be, you're unmuted. I got a feeling you've got one. Dave?
Sure, great. Thanks very much, Jay, and thanks Nicole and Steve for always a great presentation. And you guys have always brought enormous amount of information to anything that we're doing. Couple of questions. One of them around the 65 by 25. I remember when that initiative came forward, and I seem to think it was during what was it, while Governor Lynch was.
I think it's 2015.
No, it was before that, or at least the early stages of it were. But is helping to reach 65 by 25 something that that this commission wants to embrace, if not directly, but maybe tangentially, and are there policies that that this commission should consider when putting together either its recommendations or policy framework or an LSR package or something like that, that includes things like what Jay Kahn and I have talked about in the past, like having a FAFSA day in the high school or something like that.
Who are you directing that question to?
Probably to you, Nicole.
So a little bit about 65 by 25. I wasn't involved in the beginning, but I'm now involved. And the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation sort of loosely is guiding that project. Over the last several months, it's been going through a rebranding process because 65 by 25 really didn't resonate with our population. So I know that rebranding has been identified. It has not been made public yet. And I did receive an email last week saying they're sort of pausing that work. And my impression of the pause, and I don't think this is just true for New Hampshire, but maybe across the board, is one of those big questions out there is, what do workforce numbers look like now that we are living in this pandemic? And do strategies need to change as a result of the pandemic? With that said, I would recommend, sort of two recommendations come to mind. First is this notion of New Hampshire needs a systemic data system to measure post-secondary indicators. So career indicators, college indicators, we need a systemic system that enables us to do that. But prior to designing that, I think there is also an important values conversation. So what we measure communicates a value. And historically, we focus really on college enrollment, college persistence, college completion. And I think Senator Khan, I think Val, I think Steve have done a marvelous job of sort of elevating awareness around we need to have career indicators, because it's no longer college or career. Oftentimes it's the same in one. So I think there needs to be this really important conversation around what do we measure, what are those values, what contributes to the growth and the evolution of our state, and what supports our students in being viable, civically minded contributors. So those are just my initial thoughts.
I just want to add one thing to it, Dave. It's really sort of fascinating. Oh, you know, I worked a lot with Paul Leather for a stretch of time, and we had a humbling experience. We got to pitch for a big grant in Washington, and for some odd godly reason they had Paul do it, and then I joined them. And we did a good pitch, and we were talking about it was new skills for youth. It was very much tied to what we're talking about here. But every state that won, Dave, had a database that linked together secondary, post-secondary, and employment. So essentially, by linking those three databases together, they developed a data-driven system to say what decisions a school district made, potentially even in elementary school, had an impact on employment down the road. And so these states, and some of them were credible, Ohio in particular, that let alone Ohio's employment data, they had agreements with all their neighboring states. So they're able to track something like 95% of students who finished their high school careers in Ohio, and then really tie it into how they're doing in the employment world without names in it, obviously, you know, doing the data piece right, all number driven. But I loop back to your question about 65 by 25. And the predicate understanding of 65 by 25 is a student earning a credential. And I think, Val, that's what you're implying a little while ago. You're talking about this concept of, you know, it's not 2-year school or 4-year school. I mean, with due respect to plumbers and electricians. They're going to get out, they earn a credential of value. And then how do you back drive our system to encompass more people? What we know from 65 by 25, and I say this all the time to our school counselors, who, you know, typical New Hampshire right now is hovering at, in the 65 by 25 measure, 52%. And counselors say, what am I supposed to do? I said, well, quite simply, we need another 30% of kids getting a credential within 6 years of high school. And it's not a fixed mindset of 2-year, 4-year school, which obviously is impactful, but it's just this readiness to get out there. So I loop around to that employment, and looping back to the whole conversation, the employment data linking to the school data, the mindset of going to Cole saying about really valuable credentials that widen the number of students who can be successful, but it's meaningful success in the fact they do actually end up with careers. So it's a lot I just said.
Steve, in those states like Ohio that collect that data and maintain it, any ideas as to what you know, is that done by the state? Is it done by a private firm? Is it done by their departments of education? Or
it was so clear. I don't have my notes in front of me. It was clearly presented as a statewide effort, almost out of the governor's office. You know, very committed legislature, committed governor. This data is the essence of how we make decisions on an educational basis.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve.
All right, we got 3 hands up, and we're going to have to make this the last 3 hands. But Rick, Iris, Val.
Thank you very much, Jay, and good to see you, Steve and Nicole.
Good to see you, Rick.
This one's for Steve. Several years back, we required that all our high school students have 4 years of mathematics, of which one of those years may be in an applied mathematics course. And we included in that legislation that it can be done in a CTE center.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of working towards these career pathways and the certification in a skill area that we hope to see more kids coming out with, are we now able to do the same concept, and are we doing it a little bit beyond the mathematics, but in some other courses now, so the kids don't have to hang back in that high school? They can get over into the CTE program and be at the same time working towards that credential. They're also receiving their high school graduation courses. Where do we stand on that, Steve?
I would say, I think, Rick, you're implying, and I think you're not really touching on art, for example. I think you're talking about the core science, social studies, and math, I would assume.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would say that we're not especially good in that area. And I think the challenge we face, so going back, and you explained it well about the math piece, which is the embedded math in the 4th year. What we know is the way students learn is that they learn better in an all-encompassing environment. If you learn your English contextual technical writing in your auto class, you're going to put a lot more effort into that writing at that moment in time. I would say, Rick, right now, that is an open area to spend time on. It's not a particularly strong suit of the state. But in the same argument, Rick, if you go to Mass and you went to career and technical education, you'd be walking into a building, by and large, completely dedicated to career technical education. And what fascinates me about even in those buildings in Mass, they don't embed the English in there. It always just a mystery to me. So I think
that's where I am, Steve. I'm concerned that with this English and the communication and the written skills that you teach in the CTE,
right,
why not give the kid that high school graduation credit through that? And I'd like to see us expand from the math into the language arts to the English courses.
I think that is an absolute worthy area to go into, and that's where students want to learn. We just got to figure out that path. But absolutely. I want to affirm your logic. Your logic's good.
Thanks, Steve.
Whatever that means.
I'm next.
I think you're next, Iris. Yeah.
Thanks. A couple of people have mentioned in passing, back all the way to Valor in the conversation, you mentioned something about productive citizenry being the goal. Somebody mentioned civically minded citizenry. It seems to me, I remember the constitutional language being something around an informed or educated citizenry being the objective of providing an adequate education. So I wondered, I've always been interested in whether it would be possible to measure in any way the civic engagement of our graduates.
I'm going to answer you in a way that's not going to be complete by any stretch. So first and foremost, Iris, you're making the assumption that we have good data on our graduates. That goes back to my comment that I made to Dave earlier, that the state sort of needs a comprehensive approach to what our graduates look like. And the states that are on their game, and it does tie into this conversation about school funding, seem to really have embraced that question. I don't want to address, it's hard for me to address that specific question, obviously. But the spirit of it is we need to know what's happening to our graduates, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. And we need to use that data to back drive how we design our schools. And right now, I think, for example, career and technical education pays outside companies to go hunt down graduates to collect data on them because we don't have it institutionalized. And the last piece I'd say to you, strictly from a career and technical hat, is what we know from national data is that adults who have good jobs, who have career tracks, who care about their lives are more civically minded. That's a piece of hard data. I can't speak to New Hampshire graduates in that pool, but that's a pretty solid piece of data on a national level that says if you're in a good spot, and I didn't say how much money you make. That's not the spirit of my comment, but a good solid career, your citizenship ratings go right up.
That's kind of an indirect measure. Has anybody been able to create civic engagement indicators beyond that? If we were to have a robust system, would there be a way to have that be a part of it?
I make no pretense of being an expert, but I'm sure there's ways.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that there's, of course, a civic health index that the Carsey School publishes. I'm in the final stages of editing the 2020 Civic Health Index. There are probably 20 indicators of civic behavior beyond voting everything from helping your neighbors, solving neighborhood local problems, volunteering in nonprofit organizations, speaking to a public official about a local issue, all of those kinds of things. So yes, there are sort of standard indicators and measures of health that would be
Thanks.
helpful to
Very helpful. Thank you.
examine our recent high school graduates with. And I'm jumping in. We should probably leave enough time here for Drew. I think we have.
We do need to do that, but Val,
Yeah, just a real quick
last
65,
word.
yeah, real quick 65 by 25 history. So the 65 by 25 project came out of research that was done at Georgetown University, and they did an assessment of every state to see what sort of workforce education composition they would need to provide for future growth of the economy. Just about every state that Georgetown approached had some office associated with the governor of that state take on that project for the state. They couldn't find anybody in New Hampshire in government to do that. So they, the community college system sort of adopted the concept first, but the whole project went to the New Hampshire Coalition of Business and Education as the only statewide organization that seemed to be able to pull all these strings to try to get something done. After working on that for about a year or so, out of that came the Workforce Accelerator, which was a joint effort between the BIA and the Charitable Foundation. And we spent 3 years trying to stimulate the business community and the educational community to think about providing guidance and direction to students to meet the goal. The organic growth estimate for New Hampshire is that by 2025, about 58% of the students would be in that 65 by 25, or would be in like a 58 instead of 65 range. The shortfall is about 50,000 workers in the state not having the credentials that they need to satisfy the demands of the economy. And as time progressed, the feedback was that most people felt comfortable that the Charitable Foundation should end up being the focal point for the effort to get 65 by 25 through, which goes back to Nicole's comment about their efforts right now. That was a transition that took place last year. So we've been in the 65 by 25 business about 5 or 6 years right now. But New Hampshire is one of the few states that doesn't really have a governmental effort from the governor's office or from the regions to the university system driving this, which is why the data collection and the coordination of the whole effort has been very difficult here compared to some of the other states. And the outcome, unfortunately, will be if by 2025, we're 50,000 workers short of what's needed by the economy, the companies in the state will move elsewhere to find the employees that they need. It's pretty straightforward. And that's why I keep harping on adequacy for what purpose? Because if we're not building people to fill the needs of the economy of the state's going to collapse. Because the companies are going to say, I can't find people to work here. I'm going to move to North Carolina or some other place where they're training people for the jobs that we have available. And it's a very near-term problem for businesses because we're all struggling to find qualified workers. And if our schools aren't producing them, businesses are just going to move. You're on mute, Jay.
I got it. Thank you, Val. That was great history. Nicole and Steve, thank you so much. I also want to thank you. I got to tee up for the minutes. That middle school slide
Yep.
was the thing put in front of us because we're going to need to think about the enrollment in the future and not just that in the past. It's going to shape the total number of dollars that this system can support and at what level it can support them. So thanks for teeing that up. There's no answer to that one, but it is a problem for us to noodle on down the road. Thank you again. And Bruce and Drew, we had a few questions and there's certainly a lot more data out there in front of us. Drew, probably for efficiency's sake, can I just turn it over to you and you can let us know the status of where you're at? What kind of changes have you seen the model needing to incorporate since your initial presentation on the 11th?
Yeah, so we did have a few small tweaks to the model since the presentation on the 11th. Those small tweaks are incorporated into the simulator that was put on the website today. So, I mean, I don't think the tweaks are huge changes. We had one email that asked specifically about the EL weight, because that is one weight that did change fairly substantially compared to the other weights. But for the most part, the weights are very similar to what we presented last week, which is a very reassuring sign that as we continue to tweak our model and make small changes, they're not creating huge differences in the results. So I guess that's.
I know there were two questions we had out there. One had to do with the adjustment that was made for out of district. And I think you found that you corrected for maybe an overkill on or overcompensating for that.
Right. So that was one of the changes we made, was to try to not double count the tuition that's flowing from one New Hampshire district to another New Hampshire district that then is being respent by the district that's receiving the tuition. So we did make that change. And when I look at the simulator, I add up all of the revenue across the towns, we're getting total revenues very close to what is actually being reported by the New Hampshire Department of Education. So that's another indication that our numbers are in the ballpark of where they should be.
Yeah. And that sort of relates to that other question that came up on August 11th, and that was about preschool spending that might be included in some districts but not in others. But you gave a good explanation of that. I heard at one point, and I don't think this committee's heard that yet.
Right. So when our models that we're doing the analysis on are all district level models, and our assumption is that the DOE 25 data includes spending on preschool students for districts that have preschool students. So the expenditures by that district should cover the students that are in preschool in those districts. So when we do our district level models, we're including the district level spending that covers preschool students. We're also including preschool students when we calculate per pupil actual spending. So our district level models include preschool both on the expenditure side and on the student count side to calculate those per pupil spending figures. Then when we move to the simulation, which is based on the ADM at the town level, those ADMs do not include preschool students for the distribution of adequacy aid. So when we distribute dollars, that's because we're distributing dollars on a per pupil basis, we're not accounting for those preschool students in the distribution of dollars to towns.
So it drops out at that point in the calculation.
Yep.
Are there other people that have questions? Bruce, you looked like you were about to say something.
No, I'm good. This is, Drew's provided these in the form of emails and continued explanations. So I think we're good on those. And as we've tried to remind our various audiences all along, it's a work in progress. And, you know, some folks have had some technical questions about the methodologies for calculation. That'll all be addressed in the final report that AIR submits towards the end of the month in a couple of weeks. And we're tracking the public comment questions that come in and making sure that we're as responsive to those as we can be. So we're still early in the process of working with AIR's model, and then of course very early with the simulator. We just received that over the weekend. Appreciating patience on the part of our various audiences and understanding that that we haven't landed yet on a final set of ways of modeling both costs and revenues. That, that's the commission's task, and the fiscal policy and adequacy work group tasks over the next few weeks. And I guess the other thing I want to say also for the minutes, as it were, for the public record, is that AAR is giving us data to work with. We occasionally ask AAR for sort of the policy implications of that data, and based on their experience, they share with us their understanding of various policy implications. But AAR is not making policy recommendations to the commission. That's the commission's job to work with the data that AAR provides, as well as the other data that's available to us from DOE, DRA, and the very rich data we're getting from our engagement efforts. So again, just kind of recentering, recalibrating the role of AAR and the data that it's presenting, and particularly at this moment where the cake is only half baked, and so we don't quite yet know how it's going to turn out.
Thank you, Bruce. We're right at 5 o'clock. Any other things for today or agenda topics that we need to tee up for the next full commission meeting? Please submit those in writing. We'll continue. Iris, was there some? Anyway, let us know if those, if you've got topics that the executive committee ought to consider putting on the agenda for next Monday's full commission meeting.
Which right now, we don't have any presenters scheduled. I think we'll continue to work with the AAR model and the simulator. And so tomorrow, in our little exec team call with our AAR team, we'll think about how best to shape an agenda for next Monday.
Right, and then we've got you've taken on the assignment of trying to provide us with a simulator in sheets that we can paper our walls with.
Right.
Is the committee meeting next Monday, or is the full commission meeting next Monday?
Full commission next Monday.
Yes, so you're talking about 2 weeks from now.
For this committee, yes. Well, for both, no, I'd say for both. The agenda for next meeting, if there are particular topics for the full commission, as well as for our group. I know we've got to come back to our definitions, both of adequacy and for distribution in particular, how we define adequacy aid. If we've got a model with output data that is sufficient to meet our needs.
Right.
Okay. Seeing
Been a busy day.
Yeah, sure has been. All right. Thank you all for making time again. And Bruce, thanks for your coordination. Jordan, thank you. And Drew, thanks for joining us. Okay.
See you later.
Thanks all very much.
Hi, all.
Take care.
Bye.